Hi, 7th graders. Today we're going to talk about circles and circumference. So we'll do a quick review of some circle vocabulary, and then a little bit about circumference, and then we'll also move on to figuring out perimeter of what we call composite shapes. Feel free to pause the video at any point if you need more time to write something down. I'll go through the vocab pretty quickly. So again, feel free to pause if you need more time to write. So quick review of some of our vocabulary. All right, when we talk about a circle, how a circle is defined, it's defined as a set of points that are all equidistant from a center point. And that equidistant just means equal distance. Okay, so you have a center point, and then the circle itself is just a bunch of other points that are all the same distance from that center. When we talk about radius, that's going to be the distance from the center of a circle to any point on the circle. So when we discuss radius, if we have a circle, our radius is the distance from the center to any point along the edge, okay? Diameter is going to be the distance across the circle through the center. So again, if we have a circle, and then the diameter would be the distance across going through the center. So that's kind of a key point there. Circumference is going to be the distance around the circle. All right, so all the way around is the circumference. And then perimeter is just going to be kind of a review of, in the past you've maybe found perimeter of other objects like a rectangle, or a trapezoid or a triangle. And so when we talk about perimeter, that's just the distance around an object. So typically, if you just have a regular polygon, then you would just be adding up all the sides to figure out the perimeter, okay? So when we talk about circumference, we have two formulas that we can use for circumference, and they both involve the number pi. And so formulas are really cool because they are basically a template that tells us exactly what we need to do. So we use the formula as our guide, we plug our values in, and then we solve, okay? So our formulas, if we know diameter, we just do pi times diameter. So remember, when you don't see any operation symbol, you assume that you're multiplying. So pi d means pi times diameter. So d is going to represent our diameter here. And then our other formula, if you're given the radius instead of the diameter, remember the radius is half of the diameter. So if we double the radius and then multiply it by pi, then we would end up being able to solve for the circumference as well. So that 2 times the radius is equal to that diameter. So here r is the radius. And then when we talk about pi, some of your calculators might have a pi button on them. Typically, we will just round pi off to be 3.14. Or if we have fractional numbers, 22/7 is the fractional answer there too, okay? So when we look at a circle and we're trying to figure out the circumference, we first want to identify, do we have the radius or do we have the diameter? And then that helps us figure out which formula to use. So when I look at this first example on the left, I have the distance from the center to the outward edge, and so then this is telling me that this is my radius. So I'm going to look at which formula uses my radius. That's the 2 pi r formula. So that's my formula I'm going to use. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to plug in what I know, okay? So I don't know my circumference yet. The 2 is a coefficient, and it's going to stay there. I know I'm going to use 3.14 for pi, and then my radius is 12. So now that I've plugged numbers in, all I need to do is multiply them to get my final answer. So we're going to multiply 2 times 3.14 times 12. And when I do that, I'm going to get 75.36. And because we're just measuring the distance around, distance is just going to be regular units. So this would be yards. Okay, so we're not doing any square units yet. That'll be when we get to area. So over on the next circle, I'm going to try to figure out the circumference. So I would need to figure out that distance all the way around the circle. I need to ask myself, what measurement do I have right now? So right now, it's telling me the distance all the way across the circle through the center, which is what is called our diameter. So I'm going to be using this pi times diameter formula. And so now I'm going to plug in what I know. Again, a formula is really cool. It tells us exactly what we need to do. We just need to plug values in. Okay, so for pi, we're going to use 3.14, and then the diameter of this circle is 22. So I'm going to be multiplying 3.14 times 22. And when I do that, I'm going to figure out that my circumference is 69 8/100ths, and then again, just miles. So those were just regular circles. Sometimes we're going to have some trickier problems too that we need to kind of, these are called composite figures. So made up of maybe more than one figure, or maybe not as straightforward to figure out the circumference. So we're going to start with this half circle. So the half circle is a good little indicator. I'll number these a little bit. So on the half circle, we want the perimeter of this entire object, okay? And so one of the steps then is I'm going to need to figure out circumference, because I do have this curved part of that shape. And so to figure this out, that's not an entire circumference, but that's actually half of a circumference, okay? And so to do that, I'm going to use one of my circumference formulas. And when I do that, remember, like I have pi times diameter, or 2 times pi times the radius. So in this case, the diameter of this circle is 8 inches. Even though it's a half circle, the diameter is still 8 inches. The distance across it is still 8 inches. So that diameter doesn't need to be doubled or anything like that. The diameter is still 8. Okay, so if I do 3.14 times 8, so pi times diameter, that would give me what the distance all the way around a full circle would be. And so when I multiply that, I'm going to get 25 12/100ths, all right? But if I look at this diagram, I don't need the distance around a whole circle. I want half of a circle. And so because I want half of that, I'm actually going to end up dividing that by 2. And so I'll get 12.56 inches. Now, I'm not all the way done yet. So what I've figured out is this yellow highlighted arc, okay? That curved distance. I found half of a circumference. But I want the perimeter all the way around the figure. And so the 12.56 inches is this curved part, but now I need to complete that shape with this pink area. So I'm actually going to be adding on my diameter back onto it, because I want the distance all the way around the shape. Like imagine walking around that shape, or building a fence around the shape. We would need to add that 8 inches back on. And so then we'll end up getting 20.56 inches as the perimeter of that shape. When we look at number 2, we're going to ask ourselves, what shapes do we have here? Okay. And so some of you guys might say, okay, well, I see a half circle here, a rectangle, and I see another half circle. Now, remember, we're doing perimeter. So all I care about are these outside edges. I want that distance all the way around the shape, okay? And so I have a half circle and a half circle. I could kind of use some of what I just did, but I also know that this half circle, or half of a circumference, plus this half of a circumference, is going to be one full circle. So I'm actually going to find one circumference, and then I'm going to be adding on these green measurements as well to that, okay? So to find a circumference, I'm gonna identify if I have my radius or diameter. So when I look at this, I have the diameter of this circle. So the diameter is that distance all the way across, okay? And so the diameter is actually 6 centimeters. Again, I don't need to double that. The diameter, the distance across that circle is still 6 centimeters. So I'm gonna be using my C equals pi d formula. So C is gonna equal 3.14 times my diameter of 6. And so I'm gonna get 18.84. So what that's accounting for right now are just those pink highlighted portions, those curved portions of that shape, okay? So now I need to figure out the entire perimeter of that shape. So remember, I'm gonna need these green portions too. And so when I look, each green portion is 8 centimeters. So I'm gonna actually add 2 8s, okay? One for the bottom and one for the top. And so then I'm gonna be adding these all together. So my 8 plus 8 is gonna be 16. So we're gonna do 18.84 plus 16 and get 34.84 centimeters. Now, one thing I wanna point out is that even though we had some half circles on this shape, remember, perimeter is just the outside edge. So that's part of the reason why we didn't have to add back on these 6s or anything like that, because they're not part of the outside edge of that shape. And then when we look at number 3, we want to kind of identify what shapes we have. We have a half circle, and I see a rectangle. So remember, again, we're doing perimeter, so just care about that outside edge. So first I'm gonna go ahead and figure out half of that circumference. So half of the circumference plus that rectangle. So half of the circumference, I'm gonna be using my pi times d formula, okay, because that 12 centimeters is telling me the diameter of that circle. So we're gonna do 3.14 times 12. And when I do that answer, I get 37.68. Now, keep in mind that would be a full circumference. I don't need the full distance around a circle, I need half of that. So I'm gonna divide that by 2 to get 18.84. Now, we have a half circle here. So right now the 18.84 centimeters is representing that green highlighted portion that I just highlighted. We're doing perimeter. So I don't need to add the 12 back on right now because the 12 is not part of, or at least this 12 is not on the outside edge of the shape, okay? So now what we need to do is we need to add on these other outside measurements. So I have a 7, then I'll get this 12, and then one more 7. So I'm gonna be adding on 7 plus 12 plus 7, which altogether, that's gonna be another 26. And so we should get 44.84 centimeters as our perimeter. For this example, this is just describing and correcting the error. And so if we look at this, they did 2 plus 7 plus 2. So they've added up 2 plus 7 plus 2. Plus 21.98. So now let's test out and see if this distance is 21.98 or not. So I'm gonna be using half of a circumference again. So I'm gonna need 1/2 of pi times diameter. The diameter is 7. So I need to do 3.14 times 7. When I do that, I get 21.98. But remember, this would be a full circumference. This is just half. So if I look at this, at what their work was, they actually added on that full circumference. So I don't need that, I just need half of that. So I'm gonna divide that by 2 and get 10.99. And then I'll add on the 2, the 7, and the 2 again. So this is gonna be 11 plus 10.99. And so 21.99 feet should have been my answer there. All right.